Welcome to the regularly scheduled December 7th, 2023 Newmarket School Board meeting. We will start the meeting, as always, with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Frequent visitors or people who frequently watch our meetings online will notice that I am not Gary. He's joining us remotely this evening, as well as Amy Tilton. So the first thing I would look for is a motion to approve having two of our members join remotely.
So moved.
Thank you. Motion by Andrew, second by Phil. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, Gary and Amy, thank you for joining us remotely this evening. So we'll start, as always. If any members of the public are present and would like to make public comment, please approach the microphone now. Seeing none, we will close public comment at 5:17 p.m. and move on to board comments and committee updates. Does anybody have any comments or committee updates to share?
The policy committee met last week, and there's some policies we have before us this week for first reads.
I'll share that the budget committee on Monday evening, both the town and the school district it's the first meeting of making presentations to the budget committee for the fiscal year 2025 operating budgets. So anybody who'd like to see that, that'll be in the town hall auditorium and on channel 8. All right, moving along in the agenda. I would like to invite to the microphone Kim, Megan, and Ellie, all three of whom were instrumental in the fundraising and helping us to move the elementary school playground project forward.
Hello, ladies. As you know, we had our dedication ceremony on November 27th, and that was wonderful. I wish it had been 70 degrees and warm so that it might have led to more people being there, and that we weren't all shivering and wanting to go places where it was warm. So we thought it would be appropriate to invite you here tonight to officially say thank you to the PTA for all of the incredible work you guys did behind the scenes for the last, well, I can speak to a year and a half, but I know it was longer than that, wasn't it, Kim? How long were you guys involved in this?
It started in 2017.
Okay, so we're talking 6+ years.
Yes.
And so finally, on November 27th, it came to fruition, and I congratulate you on all of the work you did there. It was wonderful to see kids running around and playing on the playground. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, there are great pictures on our website and a nice video of the dedication ceremony that doesn't quite show how really cold it was. The sun is shining beautifully. It's a lovely afternoon, but boy, was it cold. So anyway, thank you so much for your efforts on that. And I know Dave Riley, would you mind coming on up too? Because I did want to take a minute, because Dave is here representing our facilities department. And actually, I'm going to imagine Sean Pine is standing next to him as well, because they were both instrumental as a district in bringing this project to fruition. So we have a couple of minor things to finish up. We got a fence that's going in here in the next, week or two, Dave?
That's what we're hoping.
Okay, that's what we're hoping. And that will officially enclose the preschool part of the playground. And at that point, we have 100% completed playground project. So congratulations to the four of you as representatives of all the other people who did such a wonderful job on this. So I would welcome everybody to. And if any of the four of you would like to add anything, feel free to step to the mic.
Honestly, I would like to thank the Playground Committee. Without their input, it wouldn't have been possible. Of course, the PTA and Mr. Pine and the wonderful Jana Mellon, without whom we would never have gotten it done. So I just want to say thank you very much.
And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the Link Together kids, who also did some fundraising back in the day and contributed multiple thousands of dollars to this project. And I found one of the nicest moments of the dedication ceremony was the fifth graders who were there as student council, but representing the fifth grade who had been in kindergarten when this whole idea first began. And it's such a wonderful way to show that if you stick to something over a long enough period of time, real things can happen that improve the quality of experience for kids. So thank you, everybody, for doing
Yeah.
that.
Thank you, guys.
I have to say it was inspirational to see the fifth graders who the entire class came out after the dedication, that they were still enjoying that playground equipment long after the cold drove most of the rest of us away. So their dedication was really inspirational.
For sure.
Moving along, Sean, would you thrill us with the student representative report?
Yes, I'll thrill you. So I'll start off with sports. So finally, winter sports got underway. The boys basketball team won 56-35 against Newt. So they are now 1-0 to start the season. Their next game is on Friday at 6:30 against Sunapee. The girls basketball team also did beat Newt 48-13. They are now 1-1, seeming that they lost to Messinic earlier. Both games, or they also have a game against Sunapee also on Friday. That will be before the boys game at 5 o'clock. And there is no girls JV team this year, but there is a boys JV team. They started off the season 2-0. So congrats to all three teams starting off the season great. The swim team, they have their first meet this Sunday from 1 to 6. And the indoor track, they have their first meet on the 16th of January at UNH. The drama club, I said this last time, but they decided on doing the play clue. There was auditions held on Tuesday, so they casted that Tuesday. It was announced on Wednesday who was casted for the show.
Anybody we know?
Me. I'm Mr. Green. Yeah. He's a money bag, so I'm looking forward to it. It's also the first musical we've done in a while. Clue, yes, I forgot to say it. It's Clue the musical. It's not the play like off of the movie. It's more of a play on the board game and not like so.
Cool.
It's more of an audience participation where the audience will have to try and figure out who, where, and what instead of just like, how the movie went. I don't know who saw the movie, but it's a lot different, and there's a lot of singing. And I haven't sung in a long time, so hopefully I'll figure that out. The class of 2026 is hosting a chili cook-off on January 20th. It's a $5 entrance fee. There's going to be a 50-50 raffle. I'm not sure of the full-on details about it, but I know I heard it's going to be like at least 15 different chilies for people to. I don't know exactly how they're doing it. I think it's like a go around. Everybody can go around and taste the different chilies. And I'm not a big chili guy, so I don't know. Student council made the Winter Spirit Week. We just finalized the days that we're going to do, so I'll read those days off. This is going to be the day before break, so not next week, the week after that. Monday is going to be Deck the Hall, so every class is dressing it's not their class color that we normally assign them to, but it's going to be their a different color, like winter related, so white, blue, red, and green, I believe, are the 4 colors. Tuesday is Whoville Hair Day, so basically just crazy hair day. Wednesday is Dress to Impress, more of New Year's like one, so dress. I don't know, like New Year, dress nice. Thursday is Happy Holidays from the family, so it's family photo day. So basically, you and your friends, however big, dress with like the same clothes that you would use for a Christmas card. I think we're setting up a big Christmas card that you can take pictures with your friends. And Friday is the traditional ugly sweater day contest that usually all the teachers participate in. So, Student Council and the National Honor Society are also caroling at the Pines. Just which I think is going to be great. I can't wait for that one.
Give you some practice on your singing.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, I'll be blurred out by everybody else, which is good because I don't want to. I gotta save my voice right now. It's been really raspy lately. I gotta like get back into singing. Salt had a guest speaker by the name of Paul Franks. He was a professional football player. He played for teams like the Packers and the Ravens and the Jaguars and the Jets. Yes, and the Jets. And finally, Search attended a poetry slam that was yesterday. I went to that. It was great. I wasn't expecting a whole lot. I'm not a big poetry guy, but it was way better than I expected. I always expect poetry like rhyming and very confusing, but it was just very like personalized. And I definitely got way more into it than I thought. I thought I was just gonna be like, I don't even understand what they're saying, but it was actually very impressive, very great. And they didn't even have papers. They were just memorized like 3-minute long poems, and I was just blown away. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Superintendent report.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Just a couple of things I wanted to mention. We talked about this previously, but we are going to be launching that health benefit review committee, and I'm trying to remember if we already picked somebody for that. Gary, nod your head if we've already nominated someone for the health benefit committee to review benefits. Okay.
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit? It's hard to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you tell me, have we appointed somebody from the board to represent us on the health benefit committee yet?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so next meeting we'll need to do that because we want to get that going in January. So I just wanted to mention that to everybody. So we're going to be launching that review process. That, just to remind you, it's actually, it involves the two unions and our non-collective bargaining employees and so forth. So it's to take a look at our benefit plan and make decisions about what we might in the future do. So just want to mention that. Second thing, I just want to remind everybody that we are moving forward on planning for our January 23rd primary day / teacher workshop day, vision of a graduate launch day with the district. We have some special, we have a special guest coming to us in the morning, a local entertainer, which I won't name by name, but we have somebody coming in to kind of get us started on a happy and fun note. But board members, you're welcome to come join us that morning. Join us for breakfast starting at 7:30. Our special guest, and then our opening comments and kind of launching the day. So anybody who's available from the board, you're welcome to join us for that. I'll put something out in writing to you in the near future. And then lastly, even though we already said it here, I did want to just acknowledge all the great work that has gone on in the district to get the playground project to where it is. You heard from Dave and you mentioned Sean, Jana, Patty Wands as well, who was actively involved behind the scenes securing the grant funds and so forth. So a lot of people made it happen, and I'm pleased to say we're like 99.9% of the way there. So congratulations, everybody. And that's all I have.
Todd, when is the workshop?
The primary day, January 23rd.
Thank you.
And like I said, I'll send out an invite to the board, but I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware you're welcome to join us for breakfast and for the opening comments.
All right. Thank you, Todd. Next up on the agenda, we have Patty Wands, our Director of Curriculum, who is going to be speaking to us about literacy pilots, teacher evaluations, and professional development.
Great. Hi, everyone. Gary and Amy, nice to see you. So excited, Sean, when you talked about the poetry slam. I used to do that with my students when I taught 8th grade. It's the best. Poetry's art. It's awesome. So glad you enjoyed it. I want to hear more about that too. Love that. Okay, so our literacy pilot, we are, as we close out the 2023 school year, teachers are kind of wrapping up from the magnetic reading literacy pilot. And we have already planned January 16th for our training for our teachers for the next literacy pilot, which is My View Literacy, K-5. And Sean and I already have on the books our next Literacy Program Review Committee meeting, which is actually next week on the 14th. We're going to just do some closing out of that magnetic reading pilot, develop some questions to push out to staff so we can begin to kind of collect that data so that when we go to compare both programs, you know, we want to give it to the teachers when it's fresh in their mind. Just some questions that I really want the teachers, the program review committee teachers, to develop, and like, what questions do we want to ask that's going to help us at the end when we go through all this data to help inform us when we do go to vote. So that work is on the 14th with the committee. On the Professional Development Committee, where Amy is a very active member of our committee, we're really excited that we are currently planning the March 12th District PD Day. And we are really happy to announce that we are bringing back Newmarket University. So before Todd and I were here, there was a thing, Newmarket University, which is, I believe, the Professional Development Committee selected that spring PD Day, where teachers actually created the learning sessions. So it's teachers providing learning to their colleagues. And those days, I know as a classroom teacher myself, and being in a district where we used to plan this day once a year, I'm sure Todd was the same way. Those are the best days when you're really excited to get into a learning session from a colleague that might be upstairs or downstairs or around the corner in a different content area, but they're sharing a practice, an instructional practice that you know that you can take something to bring back to your classroom. And it really helps to build culture, it helps to build community, it helps to really elevate professionalism and really share the work that we do. Because, and Andrew, you know, oftentimes you're in your classroom, the door is closed, and you have no idea, you know, what the teacher downstairs or in the other grade level or the other department is doing, because you just get in your own grade or content area. And so those days are just really exciting. We're getting already very positive feedback from the staff. We've already sent out a Google form to really ask two things. One, we asked staff to say, hey, share with us what are some ideas that you'd like to see in a learning session? And then another, it was a form within a form, you know, click to submit if you're interested in submitting a proposal to be a presenter, to lead a learning session. So we're getting some pretty good traction on that, on what teachers are interested in doing. And I should have probably said first that the theme of that March 12th day is multi-tiered system of support, including behavior. So we selected a theme that was very broad, overarching, so that there's so many components that would be appropriate that falls under a multi-tiered system of support. So for example, something like how do you scaffold your instruction in a classroom, or how do you differentiate your instruction to meet the needs of all the students? A lot of teachers were looking for some new classroom management, you know, different tips and tricks that the teachers do, or different ways to cultivate community of learners in your classroom. Advisory, some new ways of how are we what do we do during advisory? So there's some teachers that want to lead a session there. Looking at assessments, and we have some teachers who are finishing up their master's program at SNU who are currently in a class about assessing the rigor of an assessment. And when we talk about rigor, we're talking about a depth of knowledge. We know as teachers they're called DOKs, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So a DOK is a depth of knowledge. It's Karen Hess's work under her rigor matrix. And a 1 is that quick memorization of facts. A 2 might be vocabulary, plopping it in a sentence. A 3, now I'm really asking kids to kind of analyze, take in information, analyze what that means. And we're looking for that when we're assessing our students for a summative, but then we really are shooting for the 4. And that's the synthesis. How do we ask kids to synthesize what they learn. And I would always explain it to my students as when you synthesize, you take in all the information that you know. You now take in the new information that you learned as a result of what you knew, what you learned. What are some new ideas now that you have as a result of this? That's synthesizing it. And what are some questions that you have, and where would that lead you to? And so that's really where we're going for our assessments and for our students and their learning. And it's exciting that we have teachers that are starting to look at their own assessments through this lens. And so to share that work with their colleagues, I think is really exciting. We also are, as a professional development committee, we really felt it was important that we would kick off that day with a keynote speaker. And we're excited that we, just in the last week or so, have confirmed that we do have a keynote speaker. And his name is Mike Woodlock. And Mike is actually an assistant superintendent for the Tingsboro School District. And he also works for Novak Consulting, which is an educational consulting group. And this consulting group focuses in UDL, which is that Universal Design for Learning. So how do you look at what barriers might be to learning for children in your classroom, and how do you address that? And so that too falls under a multi-tiered system of support, and he also has a lot of background and experience with that and presenting, and he's, from what we understand, he's quite engaging. And Mike is also going to lead learning sessions. So he'll be our keynote, but then he's also going to have breakout small sessions where teachers can sign up for his work and to meet with him. And what's really great is that Andy has created several subcommittees of what teachers are more interested in learning about and what they're doing in their classroom. And one of those is a UDL subgroup. So they were particularly very excited about when they heard that Mike Woodlock was going to be speaking to the staff. So that's our PD, all the PD work that we've been doing. I don't know if there's any questions? Okay. Because we have a lot of work as a committee come the new year when all of the, the organizing, like the behind the scenes, when you put when you organize a day like this, there's just so much behind the scenes work. So, but we're happy to do it. And then lastly, I just wanted to give you an update of our teacher evaluation committee. We're not quite at the evaluation part because we're developing our portrait of a Newmarket educator first. And so we've been working with Karen Matzo from Demonstrated Success. She's really helped guide and help facilitate that work. And we have, on our committee, we have members, teachers from the high school, middle school, and elementary school, and administrators as well. And we started, the kickoff was last March, where we had a whole SAU-wide pre-K-12 activity about thinking about that portrait of an educator, what comes to mind to you for knowledge, skills, and dispositions. Collecting all that feedback, doing a lot of reading and research as ourselves as a committee, we have settled on or agreed upon these 4, I hate to say the word buckets, but so maybe I'll call them 4 indicators, or not 4 indicators, 4 descriptors, excuse me. 4 descriptors of a Newmarket educator. And I'm just going to read to you the descriptor. So 1 is a Newmarket educator embraces excellence in teaching and learning. The 2nd is to cultivate an environment of continuous growth. The 3rd is a Newmarket educator exemplifies professionalism through ethical practice, reflection, and leadership. And lastly, a Newmarket educator nurtures our school community through actions, attitudes, and dispositions. So it's a lot, and we're really, really excited about that. And the overall feedback of those, each of those like buckets or descriptors was very well received. Then what we did, we came up with indicators, much like the vision of the graduate, where we had like indicators of what does that look like, what does that mean. We have maybe 6 to 8 indicators for each of those descriptors. That's where the work can be messy sometimes, and messy in a good way, right? So, dialogue and debate just helps us grow more. And so what we as a committee, we finally agreed to them. We then sent them out to the teachers. And 2 weeks ago, the teachers met. It was either a staff meeting or a PD day. So the elementary, they're grouped by grade level. and the middle high school are grouped by department. And so the grade level coordinator or the department coordinator facilitated the activity because we thought it would be kind of crazy to get all this feedback in a huge setting. It's much more impactful and effective to be in a smaller group setting. So the facilitators were the coordinators who led the work, led the discussion, and took on the feedback. So we then collected all that feedback last week. We had we were like really holding ourselves accountable to time. We had a 2-hour meeting after school last week, and we went through all of the feedback of each indicator for the descriptors. And overall, we feel like it was very well received. Much of the feedback really led to us and our messaging and to adding a little bit more clarity to what some of those indicators looked like, or how they were worded, I should say. So our next step is to really, as a committee, we really need to go through each one, and as a committee, we need to see, okay, where do we make the edits, taking in the teacher's feedback, and then giving it back to them again. It's very similar to the process of the vision of the graduate of, the committee does kind of like that work, and then we send it back for more feedback, we go back and we edit it again. So we'll continue to do that. Our hope is that by March, we're pretty much done with the portrait of an educator that we can then really add on to our committee, meaning a board member to our committee and parents. I can't remember if it's 1 or 2, what the CPA says. But so to add on there, because the next part, now that we have this portrait of an educator completed and agreed upon, now we can say, okay, so how do we develop either a professional growth plan, or how do we evaluate teachers knowing this? And so some of the questions from those indicators for each descriptor was, wait a minute, how are you going to measure this? And so we had to say to them, we're not measuring. We're not checking a box like you've completed this. You have to think of it more holistically as, how does this inform a professional growth plan? You wouldn't expect everybody to have mastered everything. We're all in a continuous cycle of learning and growth, and our students should see that in us as educators, that we're always in this continuous cycle. It just doesn't stop. It's great. We're always learning. But anyway, so that's our work from those 3 areas. I don't know if there's any questions.
You've been busy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Busy in a good way. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there one area that you're more excited for than others?
For
like between the different things you presented, is there one that you're more excited about? Or don't you want to give that away?
I don't know. I'm excited for all 3.
Yeah.
I'm excited about what the response might be for the the next literacy program. Will it be really different? Like, I'm excited to hear from the teachers about that. And I'm really excited. I think for the portrait of an educator, like that's huge, to have a board to have adopted a vision of a graduate. And then within that same year, if we can present to you a portrait of an educator, that's a lot to be proud of. It's a lot of work, time intensive on the educators here. So,
what's used currently to evaluate teachers? Is it Marshall
or Charlotte Danielson?
So can you see the portrait of an educator replacing that?
So the portrait of an educator will just stand, much like our vision of a graduate. And so what we need to do as a committee is determine what will the tool be to evaluate or develop professional growth plans. The challenge with the Charlotte Danielson model is, I'm not sure the district, when Charlotte Danielson, I think it was like 2017 or so, maybe it was even earlier than that, where she revised her program to really add more reflection. I'm not sure that necessarily happened here.
Will that involve then having to adjust the contract, the collective bargaining agreement?
Good question.
You very well could. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is all in line with our
Okay.
collective bargaining agreement. So prior to us forming this teacher evaluation committee, Todd had spoken to the leadership of the union to say, what are your thoughts? And their thoughts were immediately, yes, please. yes, because what we want is to develop a community of educators that look for feedback, that recognize reflection just happens automatically. We're constantly reflecting. But with that, we also need feedback. And we need feedback to learn and grow. And if we don't create environments where educators feel safe in their classroom for someone to go in and give them honest feedback, it's not criticism. We're not talking about being critical. We're talking about how do we move? How do we shift? How do we, recognize some of our instructional practices that might not be meeting the needs of everyone in our classroom? And we shouldn't expect teachers to be the expert on everything. That's why we have colleagues, and that's why we can, I'd love to implement instructional rounds where you have rounds of teachers going into classrooms, collecting evidence and data for themselves to bring back to theirs, and then give feedback to their colleagues as well. So it's really a shift. And the model of the Danielson model, because it's an outdated model that they've been using, it doesn't allow that time for reflection. Instead, it's a checkbox system.
Yeah.
Are you distinguished, proficient, needs improvement, And unfortunately, the deep conversations that really need to happen about practice and instruction, they don't get to happen.
Yeah.
So the teachers recognize it. I have veteran teachers saying, I want
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah.
If I could also,
But actually, real quick, before the next thing, Gary, Amy, can you hear us? Like, I'm sure you can hear Patty clearly. I just want to make sure we're close enough to the microphones.
If your mics are a little closer, it might help. Thank you.
If everybody can just...
Maybe if Channel 8 could mute themselves, that would help too.
Thank you.
I can hear you guys, but if there is some background,
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the HVAC system, so we'll just try to get closer to the microphones. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
That's not encouraging.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things I wanted to mention, just to relate to the question you had, Andrew, just to remind people that the teacher contract runs through 24-25, but the summer of 2024 is probably when we're going to begin negotiation of that contract. And certainly there are a number of pieces we're trying to have in place to bring to the table if there is something that needs to be discussed in terms of that. I do want to mention from the evaluation component, much of this was initiated by the union. It came from them saying we do not find the method that's being used to be particularly professionally satisfying. So we actually just capitalized on their
that.
desire and interest and said, okay, let's tackle it. So I would envision anything that might impact the contract regarding this will have addressed by and we can deal with it in negotiations next summer. I don't anticipate there being anything significant. And actually, just to go back to what I mentioned, the Health Benefit Committee, the goal of that would be to have that resolved as well, because that's another component that might be contractually important. So we are trying to line things up
Yes.
Yeah.
so that if there are contractual issues to be discussed, it comes at the right time.
We had that discussion at the committee level with the teachers as well, and I said, well, next year, the 24-25 school year, it's still the Danielson model because it's in line with the CBA. However, if there is a tool or something that we find and our committee together, maybe teachers say, could we pilot this? Could we do this on a volunteer and kind of test drive this, on a volunteer basis only? That is something, sure, that we can entertain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I brought that question up, just because the people that are on the board or whoever will happen next year and decides to represent the board at that committee needs to keep in mind that all the stuff that we're trying to do, like that collective bargaining agreement, is really important to make sure stuff gets moved forward, or it could really be stuck in the mud. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, Gary, Amy, do you have any questions before Patty?
No, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Patty. All right, I'd like to invite Jana up. We all have these lovely binders in front of us. They're filled with numbers and next year's budget. So, Jana, please take it away.
Right. So there are several. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Gary, can you hear me? Gary and okay.
He's giving you the thumbs up.
Okay. So there are several documents that are part of this that are a little bit new from what you've seen before. So I don't know if the board would like me to go through those newer pieces first and then allow you to kind of vote on the budget last because you've seen that for the longest, or
They don't actually need to vote on it tonight. We just
oh,
want to
they're
make
just
them aware of
reviewing it.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely, if there's new information, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes, if you
So-
could cover that.
The primary, your binders are set up in the same structure as the budget report that we've seen before. We've just broken it out by sections. So most of that information has already been reviewed, and we've talked about the different things. This version reflects the changes that we made at the last meeting to allow for the retirement incentives that were voted by the board. So this is our current version, most updated. The financials reflect that. When we presented this to you, we did not have. I just left it here. We did not have the default budget calculated. That's usually something that we do towards the tail end. So what I have for you tonight in your packets is also, I called it Appendix B. It really should go as part of your budget report. And it explains the default budget, what types of things go into that, how we arrive at those numbers. And as you know, and for those who may not be familiar with it, as an SB2 town, we vote by ballot. So we, instead of, because we don't have an old style town meeting where we can vote up and down at the meeting, we break it into two sessions. So the first one is the deliberative session where we can discuss the cost items that are on the warrant. The second one is the voting session. The default budget comes around because in the event that a operating budget were to be voted down, if that was your last session, you still have to have a budget to run your school. So the state allowed us to create this default budget. It's a calculated figure based on the last voted approved legislated body vote of a budget, which would be last year in March, plus or minus increases that have been previously incurred as a result of a contractual agreement, with certain adjustments for legally binding things such as FICA and New Hampshire retirement, like that. So in kind of high level thing. So in a summary, what's included in the default budget is any salaries and benefits that have been previously incurred. So for us, we had 2 collective bargaining agreements that were both approved in prior votes. So the increases associated with those agreements that were voted upon are included in this budget. Staffing breakage, meaning if we had a position that was in the budget and there was a person that held it, they left and we hired somebody in at a higher or lower rate, that higher or lower rate goes into the budget. Increases or decreases in New Hampshire retirement contribution percentages. This year it wasn't a factor, but biennially that does change. Any increases in FICA required based on new salaries gets included. Any increases or decreases as required by law under IDEA for special ed or student services, including special education transportation, that's mandated by law. Increases or decreases in insurance premiums as required to maintain operations and be in compliance with our long-term debt obligations. Health insurance and dental insurance costs that correspond with the fiscal year 25 elections. We take the last year's elections and we basically move them forward. Things that are excluded, that we do not include, any proposed salary increases and benefits for groups of people that were not part of an agreement that was previously voted. Any proposed new positions that were not part of the last budget are removed. Any open budgeted position that the district is actively not trying to fill, that's removed. And costs associated with the purchase of equipment outside of an annually budgeted replacement cycle. For example, if you've always put 10,000 in for equipment replacement, you might buy different pieces of equipment, but if you always have 10,000 in your budget, that's considered to be voted upon and approved. But if you buy a grand piano one year, that is not likely to occur in the next cycle, so the cost of that purchase would be removed. So with all that said, just to give you a brief analysis, most of the changes in this year's budget, when we get to the number, it it results, of course, from salaries and benefits, because that's most of where we have our budget. And then there are certain specific changes that I have shown you on the chart on page 3 that kind of shows increases and decreases. You'll notice that this chart is in a little bit different format than what we see in our financials. Normally we break things down by salaries, benefits, and categories, which are kind of like the object categories. This is presented this way because it aligns with the default budget form that you'll see in your orange folder coming around. That we need to sign. It's a Department of Revenue sign, and it's the same bottom line number. It's just broken out a different way. So this will align with the form that I'm asking you to sign tonight. So, long way around saying the total approved budget for the default budget for fiscal year 2025 will be 27 million, excuse me, 66,373, which represents an increase of 129,629 over last year's approved operating budget. So that's a lot.
Jana, this is the time of year where I normally caution, sorry, there's a lot of feet. Caution people on default budgets just because it can be devastating to a school district. In this particular year, obviously it's still an issue, but this particular year you've done such a great job of keeping increases down. It wouldn't be as dire, but it would be an issue.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I think it's, like we said, it's been a team effort, and we really have put together our proposed budget with an operating, with a mindset of keeping things as minimizing the impact on the tax rate. There were a couple other things that went into the default budget this year. We have two bargained units that are in the middle of a cycle. So on a year where you have one that's renewing and it's a separate warrant article, you'll notice some significant variations. But this year we're kind of in a middle area. So, that's the default budget. Does anyone have any questions for me about that? No.
Just one, Gary, if you could maybe be a little farther back from your microphone when you speak, the gain seems to be coming through. We can hear you very, very clearly.
Super loud. Oh, okay. Sorry, I will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Okay. All right. So the document that you'll see in the folder to sign, it's basically just the Department of Revenue's version of what I presented to you, and it will be coming around for signature tonight. And it becomes part of what we present on our warrant. The other piece of information that we didn't have the last time we met is we now know our tax rates, and we now know our adequacy aid estimates for the next cycle. So we tried to prepare kind of an analysis for you to let you know what the tax impact estimate and the adequacy aid estimate for 24-25 might be. Before we get too far afield, I just want to remind everybody, the key word there is estimate. Like we do our best with the numbers that we have at this time, but when we make these estimates, we make an assumption that something that basically never hold. Like we say we're going to spend every penny of the appropriation. We say that we're going to get no additional revenues, that the state's going to follow a constant model with the funding, and we all know that in every single cycle, those levers go up and down in different ways. So this is our attempt to encapsulate the gains and the losses and the impact, but please understand that what really matters is what happens next year when we set the tax rate, and it can vary. And as an illustrative example, I cited in this analysis that in fiscal year 24, based on all of those assumptions, that every dollar gets spent, the student counts remain static, the revenues come in exactly as estimated, and no changes are made to the adequacy aid formula. When we made that estimate, we had estimated a total tax impact of $3.35 for our budget last year.
Excuse me.
God bless you.
Thank you.
What actually came in was a $2 increase. So that's $1.35 down from what we estimated with all those assumptions. So that's kind of, some years it's more, some years it's less, but it's very hard to hit that right on the head. This year, the estimated tax impact of our operating budget, as shown in the budget binders that you have and in the draft warrant that we'll discuss next, is $1.56 per thousand, which is significantly lower than our estimated tax increase for fiscal year 24. If you remember, we'd estimated $3.07 last year. And it's important to understand that while our proposed budgetary increases are quite close, last year we asked for 3.9 increase. This year it's 4.3. The variance in the estimated tax impact is due to fluctuations in state revenues that we've experienced, which we don't have any control over. We put a couple charts in there to kind of show you the history. The primary state source that we get is our adequacy aid and our SWEPT. And in this chart, it's kind of noteworthy that we received just under $5 million in total state aid in 2022, and we have yet to receive that amount again. You know, in spite of our inflationary environment that we have, adequacy aid to the school has actually dropped, and we still haven't gotten back to the level we had in 2022. Another part of that's a little bit nuanced, that's important to state, is that overall aid is composed of two components, one of which comes from the state from sources such as lottery or other sources that are derived not locally here. The SWEPT, which is the property tax, even though it's a state tax, it's still raised here in Newmarket based off of tax assessments from people that live in town. So even though it's called a state tax, that is equally impactful to local people here. And if you look at the chart in the red bar that I show on page, actually I don't have a page number, but on the second page of my analysis, you can see that in this year when our tax rate went up quite a bit more than we have had in the past, you can see that the portion of the SWEPT that composes our adequacy aid went from 1,400,000 in 2023 to requiring taxpayers to raise $1,973,000. So that's a big difference, an extra $500,000 that we had to raise and appropriate locally that we didn't have to get from other sources. Yeah.
Is that consistent across the state, or is that unique?
Well, consistently inconsistent across the state. I mean, it's
Is
vague.
sort of that amount get smaller for all communities, or are we just going through
I would say on a global sense, yes, it got smaller for everybody because there were some one-time revenue sources that the state offered in that year where we only paid $1.4 million that they took away. But I wouldn't say that the impact that Newmarket experienced is global across the state. I would say some communities probably fared better than we did, some probably fared worse. But I do think that was a fluctuation, and I think Todd can probably speak to it.
Yeah, one of the variables there to keep in mind is combined with the shifting to the SWEPT, there was also a determining adequacy aid. They shifted it more to a needs-based formula. So the things like free and reduced lunch counts and things like that became more a factor in the process. So towns that had lower free and reduced lunch counts, which don't forget, during the pandemic, nobody had any, so they were using old data, got less. And I think Newmarket, we historically have not had comparatively speaking, a high percentage of free and reduced lunch. So we, from a needs basis, the net grant went down, but the decision to with adequacy aid being $4,100 a kid, they still needed to award us that much. And so basically what happened is you take the SWEPT and the net grant, add them together, divide it by 4,100, and that's roughly how many kids we have, and that's basically where the number comes from. So when our net grant goes down and they want to award us that, they have to make it up someplace. So for us, we got a more of an impact than I think other districts. Although I would tell you, I'm a Lee taxpayer, and my tax bill does not feel any better than what is happening here in Newmarket.
And I went on to the New Hampshire state website, and Excel sheet where they listed all the tax rates for the, and Newmarket was in the top 10 for raising through SWEPT. So it was a state requirement, and we were the only billion-dollar town that had the SWEPT that high. It was really interesting to see the ramification, like how communities were, how the SWEPT changed for each community, and it didn't seem like there was a consistent, like this type of community was hit harder than more, but Newmarket got hit.
What it comes, I mean, I'm going to oversimplify this pretty dramatically, but some towns are very property rich and spend relatively less on education because they have a population that has fewer kids, or they're part of a large cooperative school district, for instance. Towns like that, you know, tend to benefit greatly from the existence of SWEPT. There are some towns in this state that the revenues generated by SWEPT exceed what they spend on education. This is the donor towns argument that you hear a lot about. We tend to be toward the other end of the spectrum. I mean, we're a billion-dollar town, but we're a billion-dollar town with a pretty sizable population. So we have a lot of school-age children compared to some of our peers in that area. And we're a standalone district, yes. That.
And mostly a residential district. There's not a lot of in development, you know, commercial that would, like you go to Newington where they have all, well, it's probably a bad example because now the mall's collapsing, but at one time, just having a significant percentage of commercial development compared to residential, it just doesn't impact the same.
All other things being equal, commercial real estate appraises for more. So.
Yeah.
So when I look at that chart here, like for 23 actually isn't a number. That is like small amount that we had to collect, right? That's that, right?
Yes, yes, and
we're
that,
actually closer to back where we were.
with regard to the SWEPT, but
Yeah.
you also have to consider the overall total aid package too, and we're just finally, we still aren't there yet, but we're just now getting close to a sum total of what we got in 2022. So, you know, and you have to consider, like, with everything that we've faced, and we all see it when we go to buy eggs at the grocery store or fill the gas tank or whatever, in this inflationary environment, the contribution that the state is actually making to our education has actually dropped in the two most inflationary years that we have seen since probably till the 1970s. So it's just something to consider. You know, our costs didn't stay the same. You know, all of our costs went up for everything that we're doing. So I think it's just another example of, you know, there's a lot of discussion about what it really does cost, what the state should be paying to fund an adequate education. And, you know, the recent lawsuit that was decided, whether it holds or not, was the answer. They're not funding an adequate education, and what they should actually be paying is roughly 2 times per student what they're paying now across the state.
That is the declining student population anyway impacting.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's the formula for adequacy aid, definitely it takes into consideration how many students you have. The education freedom accounts where they're paying, where students are able to get that education. You know, you could argue how significantly it impacts, but that has a marginal impact. And, you know, overall, just the free and reduced numbers, with them placing a heavier emphasis on towns that have the need. They've changed the formula a little bit. And, you know, we have need in this town for sure, but not to the extent of some of the other communities around us. So when they weight it more heavily that way, we don't do as well when they factor that in. Yeah. So for first, I should say to Gary or Amy, any questions on that document? Oh, I don't see Amy.
No, Jana.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
And then the last document, this is something that we're presenting to you for the first time tonight. This will be something that we'll discuss with you later after you've had a chance to think about it and what you want to do. This is the draft version of the school warrant, which includes those tax impacts. This year, we have several articles that we're proposing. The first one is to elect our officials, which is always there. Second one's our operating budget and the default budget. Third one, we're proposing to fund our new capital improvement plan. The amount, you'll notice the amounts are highlighted because those are things for the board to decide what they feel the correct number is. It's also a decision that we're going to want to talk about is where you would like that funding to come from. So right now, the way this draft is written, that article for capital improvement is something that would be raised and appropriated. It wouldn't come from fund balance. It's something that would be part of our capital improvement plan we would do every year. It doesn't have to be that way. The board can choose to do something different. The other two articles, 4 and 5, that we put on, one is a proposed $50,000 to be added to the Special Education Trust Fund from fund balance at the end of the year. And then the second one is $50,000 to be added to the Insurance and Benefits Expendable Trust from fund balance at the end of the year. And the reason we put those on were to a couple reasons. One, we've seen some variability in our out-of-district tuition for student services, so we felt that we needed to kind of build that a little bit more. And then as we talk about this insurance and benefits analysis, it's likely that we'll have some type of differential. So we've thought that adding the $50,000 to this would allow us to be a little bit more flexible when rates came in and if things came in a little bit differently than we planned as part of our analysis. So this is all for the board to, look at those things and decide on and vote on at another time. But this is just kind of our first stab at kind of capsulizing what do we think our needs might be for your review and consideration.
Thank you. If nobody minds, I'll throw the first question out, which is more procedural. Do we normally have an article on here about the right to hold one special meeting in the event that the budget is defeated, or is that just for the CBAs?
I think that's for the CBA. Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. We've had it on for the last 2 years because we've had it each cycle.
Okay.
So that's why it's front of mind. But yes, they hold that one special meeting to just discuss cost items from a bargaining unit article that failed.
Okay.
So that would not be on here this year. We have had the attorney look at this. She has vetted it, but obviously we will have her take one last look at it once we finalize numbers and language and all of that.
All right. Thank you. Phil?
So look at the trust funds.
Yep.
So I get the insurance and benefits when you started that.
Yep. Yep.
But we have the special education fund sitting at 300. When's the last time we pulled money out? How regularly are we leveraging that? And what balance is like the target?
Well, the
I'm gonna
answer is
let Todd address
the answer
that.
is we haven't leveraged it recently, but we also have not budgeted as tightly as we have been doing the last couple of years. And so one of the things to keep in mind that while 300,000 may sound like a lot of money, it's not uncommon to have a single placement that might be $250,000, depending on the needs. And as we kind of began to analyze what would be considered like safe practice, I hesitate to say best practice because it's more just conservativeness in me. Safe practice would be to protect ourselves in the event of a high and a middle and a low placement. And so having $400,000 to $500,000 ultimately is a safer place to be in case we get a need that we don't know of. And that is one of the things that happens in public education. At any given day, you can have a student walk through your doors that has significant needs that you have to meet. And so anyways, that's the logic in it. We haven't touched it in quite a few
I
years.
can't tell you when it hasn't been touched since I've been here, but I also know that our budgeting philosophy, in conjunction with the board's philosophy, has been to budget more closely over each year. We're getting a little bit more, we called it weeding the garden, but we try to budget more closely with better information because we have better information, right? So in the past, if there was a factor for, well, maybe we'll estimate that we might have this, we're not putting that into the operating budget. We're trying to bring it down to what we know we're going to need, and we're hoping to use those capital reserves as a rainy day event.
So, can I just one? So, yeah, I have no frame of reference outside of what Superintendent just said. As to what is the target number there, right? Do we have historic data as to how much we would have potentially spent out of there that we actually pulled out of operating budget?
No.
I'd just before we don't have to vote today, right?
No.
I'm just wondering. I don't want to make you jump through a million hoops, but if it's not incredibly difficult, just getting some historic data as to hey, this is what would come out of there that we spent over the last 5-10 years.
I think what we can definitely do is say what we've spent on out-of-district placements.
Yeah.
And you can see that. And so this is geared to protect us against a spike in that we didn't expect. So we can definitely do that. I think it would be to tease out the difference of what would have come out of it versus what we took from the budget. I don't know how to do that.
Just some basis of estimate.
Yep,
So it's
we can
what is it?
definitely. Yep, we can. We can do that. We can probably give. In fact, we can give 4
Eric,
or 5 years worth of data of what we spent on out-of-district.
Yeah,
placements.
and we could even probably just say the number of in a gross sense, the number of out-of-district placements, with the understanding they're not all the same dollar value, right? We could do an average cost of number of placements and what we've spent to give you a sense of what can happen with one.
Which
And
is
it-
sort
you
of-
know.
And it gives you a sense of the variability.
Yeah.
And I think that's the issue you're trying to.
and just get into a target, right? Hey, because once we get to whatever that target is, and we set that,
Right.
it's let's not keep adding money to it. Let's
Right, right.
I mean, I don't think we're in a dire strait that if we don't put 50,000 away, that somehow that's
Right.
going to be cataclysmically bad for us.
Right.
It's more just knowing that where we are at, one high price placement wipes out that fund.
And I'm not saying don't. It's just I don't have a
Right,
basis
exactly.
estimate.
Yeah.
for
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you know,
Yeah.
is there any guidelines or recommendations that the superintendent or school board association recommends?
Another thing we can look into.
I'm not aware of any, but
Okay.
that doesn't mean that it's not out there.
Okay.
I mean, there are lots of different philosophies of
Yeah.
how to use trust funds.
Yeah.
Some districts think of them as rainy day funds. Some use it as just an ongoing pass through that they're using to set money aside for specific costs.
Yeah.
So it is more of a philosophical. We could certainly look at
Okay.
that.
And I feel like Team Dan and Team Phil right now, can I just ask about the technology trust fund? Was there ever any a decision about that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
You want to talk about it? 'Cause Jason actually
Yeah,
mapped out a plan.
sure.
I thought
So
shared
we had already decided, based on board feedback, that we were going to try and spend that fund down over a span of 3 years.
Okay.
You're not going to see it. We still have to appropriate the monies that we're going to spend, but what we will be doing is coming to the board and asking for a release from those funds that would become a revenue on the other side. And what Jason had estimated, I think he thought that if he could get it down to 50,000, he felt that that would be an appropriate level to kind of cover a server failure and that type of stuff.
So basically, we're going to use it for the replacement cycles over the next.
Right, part of it, not all at once. We're going to kind of use it so that we can get a little bit of, level off that. Yeah, right. But that was Jason's plan. That's what he recommended. And so, again, you won't see it because it doesn't show as a down in our appropriated budget. We still have to appropriate those funds. During next year, we anticipate coming to you with a request to release some, as agents, to expend some money from that trust. And that what would happen is we would basically offset an expenditure in our budget. It would show that we expended it, but we also have a revenue that comes in from the
It'll end up in fund balance.
Exactly, precisely.
So you really will, the impact of it will show up either in fund balance or 2 years down the road when they set the tax rate and say, oh, that's
Right.
2 cents or something
Right.
like that.
We still have to expend the money, so you won't see it in the expenditure side that I present to you, but what you will see is at the end of the year it would come in. So we'll be working with Jason on the timing of that, what type of timing makes sense, and it's probably going to be based on when he does his planned purchases for
Yeah.
these things.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you said this, but we were going to gradually spend that money so we don't artificially lower our expenditures one year and then spike the following year.
Right. Yep.
Gary, Amy, any other questions before I go on and talk some more?
Just about Article 3
Okay. On the warrant?
on the warrant. So we're showing this from, to be raised from taxpayers as opposed to retained from capitals, unexpended fund balance. Sorry, excuse me.
Right. That's the way we presented it based on our capital plan because.
Yeah, yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's the right approach. I'm hesitant to do that because we obviously don't want to add more to the tax rolls or the tax rate. But if we, for some reason, did not have that in capital reserves at the end of the, or unexpended fund balance at the end of the year, we've committed to this capital improvement plan. I just wouldn't want to be in a situation where we shot ourselves in the foot the first year we're trying to get a good capital improvement fund going. If that makes sense.
Amy, any questions or comments? Oh,
Can you not hear us, Gary? We can't hear you.
I wasn't sure Amy heard you, but she shook her head no, so.
No,
all right.
sorry. I was shaking my head no.
Sorry, we can only see one of you at a time on the monitor, so it's whoever has spoken most recently. Just so you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you for letting me know.
Thank you. This is more of an observation, given that we've only seen this kind of recently, so I haven't thought it through thoroughly. But there's something a little circular about the idea that, well, we're budgeting tighter, so therefore we have to tack on capital reserve additions in other warrants. I mean, it is an improvement, obviously, in the sense that we only do it if the money is left over in fund balance, but that it feels a little bit like, you know, I lightened this pocket but took it out of that one instead. We've only recently seen this. I've not had a lot of time to think it through, but that was kind of my first reaction to the rationale.
Can I offer a counter
Please,
to that?
yeah.
That I think it gets to Gary's point that for capital improvement plan, we're like, we got to raise this, right? We're not saying, hey, if there's only enough.
No, yeah, no, the CIP one, I understand. We talked about that. The committee endorsed it. We've endorsed it. I'm more looking at Article 4 as a, you know, just the commentary that accompanied it.
Mm-hmm. Right, but I think that what I heard, and correct me if I misheard, is that because we're budgeting tighter, what we're going to say is, hey, we're not going to like spend this out of operating budget. We're going to spend it out of this, and we're just going to fund balance. We're not going to like raise and appropriate. We're going to, so that doesn't feel like rob Peter to pay Paul as much as like, hey, we're going to continue to contribute to this with fund balance up to a certain level, then like expend out of there as necessary. So it does feel like there's a tightening of the budgeting process in that. Like, I don't know. Like,
I mean, yeah, it is a tightening of the budget process. It just comes with this little thing on the back end.
it feels like mitigation.
I know what you're saying, Dan, but I don't necessarily agree because I think the first year it feels that way. But ideally, once we get that capital fund to where it should be, we won't be kind of pulling from one pocket to another pocket, right? We'll be static.
Yeah, fair enough. If we reach that point, then yes, that makes sense.
And we're not raising and appropriating it every year, not knowing if we're going to spend it, which I think is actually like the less responsible thing to do. Is just like maybe we're going to spend it, so we raise and appropriate every year, then we just have more fund balance left year. So it is I feel like this is a much tighter budgeting.
Yeah. If I could just remind the board, there are multiple financial tools that we have at our discretion. In fact, maybe Janet, you would be better to the various unexpended fund balances, and the name of it is escaping me. The reserve fund.
Oh, the retained
fund. Thank you. Can you just briefly just remind people of that?
Right.
That's another tool.
So we recently, I think it was last year, we used to be able to, based on state law, we could retain up to 2.5% of the net assessment in town as a cap. It's a contingency fund, retained balance to use for contingencies. The state law changed a couple years ago, and they increased that up to 5%. Last year in the spring, I came to you and I recommended, because I knew we were coming into the end of the year because of some of our grant funding with some additional fund balance, to raise it in last year up to 3.5%. So 3.5% was about 688,000, if I'm not mistaken. So that is also a resource that we have. It's kind of what we consider our rainy day fund if something catastrophic happened to a building, or something happened that we really couldn't have anticipated in the budgetary cycle. So we do have that mechanism as well.
Jana, isn't the process of expending that money quite a bit more difficult and requires special meeting and?
It requires, yes, there is a process, and I have to be honest with you, I haven't had to use it yet, but I know it does involve, you have to get permission from the Department of Education. They waived that during COVID, but they're back to that restriction, so you have to get permission from the commissioner to access those funds for your whatever it is. And I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with all of the steps. We would investigate that if we had to do it. But it's not like this board can just say we're just gonna spend it. There is an actual process that we have to gain approval to do it.
So I just wanted to point that out, because that is another mechanism that is separate from these funds. And so certainly if people were not inclined to want to contribute to those funds, I just wanted to remind you that we had another mechanism that's there as well. So anyway.
Thank you. So can I ask one other question? Just help me, and hopefully it's helpful to others, think through the tax rate impact in very coarse terms. So the 4.3% increase is $1,140,000. In very coarse round numbers, that's $1.14 on the tax rate. Adequacy, we're projecting that it goes up by about 220,000. So that's 22 cents in the other direction. Now we're at 96 cents.
Yeah.
The difference between there and $1.56, I'm assuming, is the difference in fund balance, that when we calculate the number for the warrant, we assume the fund balance is zero, but this year's tax rate was benefited from a fund balance of, wasn't it about $750,000 that we?
Yeah, it was about 771.
Okay.
But we had taken some other things from fund balance.
Yep.
We voted, but yes, that was what got turned back.
So that's the squeeze between those three numbers,
Right.
is the fact that we don't, for purposes of the warrant, we don't assume that there's fund balance left over, but
Correct.
customarily, to some extent, there is.
Right. And I mean, historically, I think I've said this to you before, I wouldn't feel like I was doing my job if I did run the budget down to zero, because
Of
you never
course.
know what
Yeah.
happens, right? The goal is not to leave too much, but you also have to come into the end of the year knowing that if something happens or if there's an adjustment you have to make, you can cover that. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
not questioning
yeah,
that at all.
yeah.
I'm just trying to roughly wrap my head around the numbers
Yeah.
that, as presented, and, that if the fund balance came in kind of within the historical range norm at the end of next year, all other things being equal, that $1.56 probably drops by 60 or 70 cents.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments from the board?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And then, if you have any questions, certainly take a look at the binders. There's a lot of information in there, but, I would recommend, I think, Todd, have them submit questions to you in email, and we can prepare responses and investigate anything that you might need to, think of after the meeting.
But I did make notes of the, particularly with the special ed fund, what we need to do.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Next on the agenda, Todd is going to share with us something we discussed a couple of meetings ago, the sample of a tuition agreement that we might put in front of another school district who was thinking of sending some students to Newmarket.
Now, this is one I'm fairly familiar with because I negotiated it when I was in my previous district, so I kind of have some familiarity with it. The sample I'm sharing with you is the agreement that was the initial agreement when Oyster River entered into a tuition arrangement with Barrington. And just to kind of explain to you some of the parameters, there are different ways that you can go about costing out what you would charge. So for example, if we have like a single student who is coming to Newmarket from another district, say on a hardship placement, the rate we charge that district is the rate that the DOE determines as the per pupil cost, which is typically somewhere around $21,900. The difference in a tuition agreement, particularly when you're talking about trying to utilize excess capacity, is you're trying to find a point in the market that you can get students in seats to fill that capacity, but not require you to do anything other than welcome that student into your system. That's the idea. So for example, if you have a classroom that has, say, 15 kids in it, adding a 16th child to that classroom, if the teacher's already been paid for, the lights are on, the furniture's there is no additional cost to the district. So when we created this agreement, this started with the idea of, in fact, it was commonly referred to as the Barrington rate, which I will be honest with you, taxpayers were frustrated at initially because they were arguing that the tuition partner was getting a discounted price compared to what it was costing resident people. But what you have to understand is that in that price, you're not calculating in special education costs, you're not calculating in transportation costs, you're not calculating in everything. You're simply trying to find a price point that will allow you to enter into an agreement to fill those vacant seats. So in this particular agreement, if you look at the second page, you can see the initial rate that this was, keep in mind, this is 2014, so it's a lot more than that now. But $14,000 was considered what we often referred to it as a blended rate. It was just the rate that we charged all students, and then if that student had other services like special education, things like that, there were add-on costs attached to it. But basically that rate was used to, so if you had 100 students times 14,000, that's what the sending district would pay. So one of the challenges is to, number one, finding that partner, and then for us to do some analysis internally about what our capacity is in terms of when does increasing students also have an increased cost associated with it, and at what point does it stop being a benefit to us to bring in students. So clearly finding a partner that has just the right amount of students so that you can find that balance is the challenge. So for Oyster River, they set the number at 200 because that was the capacity that we had at that time, and so we could absorb up to 200 students from a district. So if it were for Newmarket, I know you've heard Andy talk frequently about the fact that we have lots of capacity, and I think he said you could at the budget hearing, budget meetings, he mentioned if 2 bus loads of kids showed up from another district every day, we could absorb them without increasing staff. That's not a very scientific analysis, so I would hesitate to use that as take that to the bank. That being said, we do have a lot of excess capacity, and certainly I think we could do some analysis of that based on, we could take our current staff levels, average enrollments in all our classes, and we could come up with a very clear number that the board could then understand, okay, this is how many kids we could potentially take in from someplace else that could, and then from that you then start talking what's the price point, what's that going to be? Because I think that the hardest thing for taxpayers to grasp is every dollar, if you have space and you're not using it, every dollar that you get paid is a dollar you don't have. So while it may, if you set a price point in your tuition rate that is less than the average cost per student, people often read that as like, wait a minute, that's a discount. But it's for us, it's every dollar is a dollar we don't have to collect because we're not adding staff, we're not adding any additional costs. Certainly. So that's the big part there in the cost associated with it. You can see throughout the agreement there are multiple places where it, and this was very thoroughly vetted by attorneys to kind of take a look at all the key components that a sending district might look for. Obviously, having a clear understanding about special education costs and how that's going to be. We just had a conversation about the potential of a significant cost there. So you have to make sure that's spelled out. You can, the Oyster River District has evolved from this to a more of a what they now call a fully blended rate, so that they take the total cost and the only thing that is paid for additionally for special education now are staff members that have to be hired specifically to deal with a kid from that sending district. But anyway, there are different ways to structure that. The other thing to get into is depending on your partners, the school you're partnering with, if we were going to be the only district that they were sending students to, like say for example, it was a small community that we could absorb all of the students, then there are components of you become what's called a school of record, and there are requirements that you have to meet in order to maintain that status as a school of record for that school district. And obviously that implies basically making sure we're adhering to all the state standards and so forth for the program, which is, we would do that anyway because we value that. Other things to keep in mind, you know, obviously payment schedules get spelt out there. When you have, like in our case, because we don't have a career technical center, one of the things we probably would want to look at is like how would that cost get absorbed if we had a kid coming from another community that wasn't a Newmarket kid that also wanted to go to SST. Is there an additional, we talked about cost of SST going up, so clearly that's something we'd want to make sure we fully fleshed out. Beyond that, there's a lot of language in here about the receiving school, in this case if it was Newmarket, verifying that we're going to maintain all of the quality components of our program to make sure we continue to meet the ASC accreditation, to make sure we continue to follow, to meet all the state standards. And again, depending on the school district, and if we were a school of record for another community, they probably would have questions about how would their school board have any say over what transpires here. And so the way it was handled in Oyster River was that we agreed that a couple of times a year there'd be a joint board meeting of the two school districts. You'd sit down and you'd talk about it, and if issues came up, you would work to try to resolve those things. The resident district or the receiving district is still ultimately, that board makes all the decisions about the program, but wanting to give that sending district some opportunity to express any concerns they have, and that is worked into the contract. Clearly, there are issues when you have students that are not of your community regarding how you manage student records, student discipline, all of those kind of things. Obviously, when we deal with a Newmarket student, there are policies that the Newmarket School District has. A kid from another school system, we'd have to make sure to clarify in the agreement that our rules apply in our schools, and you know that they're responsible for that. And then beyond that, there's just all of the things you have to do to make sure that programming is aligned. For example, if it's students from far away, how are they getting here? Because obviously, if we had 100 kids from another school district that all had cars and they wanted to drive here, we don't have enough parking to manage that. So clearly there needs to be some conversation about what's the transportation arrangement going to be. Is the sending district also going to provide transportation? Clearly you want, for students to be successful, you want to work to coordinate curriculum to make sure that kids are prepared to be successful. And particularly if you have a single school district that is sending students here and we are the school of record, I think there'd be an obligation to do what we could to, you know, work through those curricular issues. Obviously, getting school calendars to align would be something we'd want to work out and arrange. But anyway, so there's a lot to it. But this is simply a draft of that, and I would tell you They just, in fact, at last night's Oyster River Board meeting, they renewed the contract for, this is where reaching the end of 10 years in the Oyster River District, and they're continuing that arrangement. It's worked pretty well. I think the challenge would be finding the right partner, and I think that's what, if we were going to pursue it, I think what I would want to know is, do you want me to start reaching out to other districts that might be interested and start exploring that? Clearly, we could do nothing like any earlier than probably the 25-26 school year at earliest. And typically what you do is you have to start having a in fact, I don't know how many of you were involved in the conversation when Newmarket and Oyster River were talking, but there was a lot of conversation about how can you roll this in to minimize the disruption to kids. So for example, if you have a school system that's interested in it and they want to send all their kids here, you don't want to just say on day one, 100% of the kids show up in all 4 grade levels. You sort of roll it in, like start with the freshman year, so it's gradually rolled in, so that over a period of years, the full impact is experienced. But anyway, that's the general idea. Thoughts, questions?
Thank you for this. Can I ask, when you were negotiating this, what the hardest point was?
To be very honest, it was sort of like speed dating, trying to find a partner that, and again, speaking to, because we were in conversations with Newmarket at the time, finding a partner that was looking for the same thing that you're looking for in terms of the level of commitment and involvement. We actually, when we did, I did presentations, because I was principal at the high school at the time. I did presentations in Deerfield, in Barrington, and Newmarket, and there was one other, Nottingham. And so it's a lot of just talking to people, trying to get a handle on what are they looking for. I mean, ideally, if we were to pursue this, and I put that as a big if, I don't want anybody to think that if we were to pursue it, it would be very important that we found some partner that we felt community-wise aligned with our values, so we wouldn't have a lot of disagreements over key components. But yeah, I think it was finding the partner.
Yeah.
The cost, again, when you're talking about it from the standpoint of we have excess capacity, no question about it, you can set an extremely low rate potentially and still benefit financially. So if you said, gee, like in this case, we were charging in Oyster River 10 years ago $14,000. The going rate at the time was closer to $17,000 or $18,000. So that did annoy other partners, because they were like, well, wait a minute, you're underpricing. But at the time, it worked because we had all the space. At some point, though, the contract did shift to a model that was more paying the real cost. So I would tell you now, what Barrington is paying is a lot more, because they are paying the full cost of everything, including transportation. But again, that's cost shouldered by the sending school. It's not the cost we're shouldering. All we have to figure out is how many students can we take and what's the price point that makes it worth it to us with the right partner.
I mean, I think it's a great idea. I would absolutely, from my perspective, encourage us to. I mean, if we have empty seats, there's just money that is basically. I think it's like leaving the windows open.
Phil, I can't hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me
Okay.
now, Amy?
I can hear you now.
All right. Yeah, if we have empty seats, leaving the windows open with the heat on, just letting I mean, totally makes sense. And find the right community. I get finding the right community is important in this. So, it seems to me a worthwhile endeavor to try to find the right community. Because flip side of that is we're sitting here in a couple of years, whoever's on the board in a couple of years, and again, looking at the budget and where does that start? How tight can the belts be tightened before major structural things have to happen?
Well, I think too. I think along with funding, I think it also helps us justify the options we want to offer all our students. When we're having class sizes so small, it's easier to justify it when there's more students in there. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that is something that was beginning to happen in Oyster River that was largely stopped. because we had shifted into a pattern in the early 2010s of every year we were reducing by 1 or 2 staff, and it was sort of a steady drip of reductions. And then once you solidify a number, you then start building back the programs that you had to slowly not offer. And particularly when you talk about programs like AP courses and things like that, there's no question you can offer more of those things. And then I think a separate conversation, certainly we've talked sometimes about whether we wanted to offer a program that we don't currently have, like a cybersecurity program or something like that. And certainly number of students that might potentially sign up for a program like that, in addition to the dollars you might get from that, would potentially make that a real possibility.
And I would say I totally understand the bargain basement pricing, because you charge $2. That's, if we're not hiring any more staff or you spend any more energy or anything, that's revenue, right? So I'm not saying charge $2.
Well, and the $4,100 from the state.
Right. So you're getting there's to benefit. Once we get to a certain point, though, we're like, okay, now we're gonna start adding new programs. That changes the math a bit of okay, now if we're bringing stuff in and adding cost, then it becomes, okay, what are we charging to make that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important, not just to see this deal as it would work today, but how it might work in the future in the event that this does inspire you to want to increase programming or other associated things. Sean, you look pensive over there. Any thoughts? How does this sound to you? I'm really curious, to be honest.
You guys are throwing around a lot of numbers and stuff.
Yeah, but put the numbers aside for a minute. I mean, just the idea that you might bring in a cadre of students from another town and, assume for the sake of argument we do a pretty good job, that we're not going to go to a reform school and bring them in or something, but what kind of thoughts?
For me, opening up more opportunities with classes, if that opened up opportunities we need more staff for these students, and it opened up more AP classes. I know as somebody who takes AP classes, have friends that take AP classes, and also have friends who have to take online AP classes because they're not offered, which I understand completely, but if for some reason there was the opportunity for opening up, AP Human Geography or AP Physics, something like that, would be great. And also just other activities that are limited with number of students. I know just from clubs that I've been in, obviously athletic numbers have been somewhat dropping. I know especially for baseball. So bringing in students who have different interests in various clubs would create just more. I don't know how to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, but
Absolutely.
just more variety, or drama club would increase the number of actors. We don't have as many high schoolers that want to act anymore, so increasing numbers in every subject, every club, and also number of students who want to take certain AP classes. So maybe we could have that AP class, but.
I know when I was over here as a Oyster River principal talking with Newmarket, I remember doing a meeting with a class, it must have been a class of 2013, so it was before your time. But one of the concerns that came up was more in the competitive athletic realm, losing out on varsity opportunities.
Yeah.
So obviously Newmarket isn't entitled to have 2 varsity basketball teams, for example. By NHI, you have 1 team, and so if you bring in students from someplace else, that's where people got a little concerned.
Yeah.
But when you started to think of it in terms of broadening other co-curricular programs, like you mentioned the swimming program.
Yeah.
It's well,
25
if there's a
people.
single-digit number, you could easily have a lot more kids in a swimming program. You could have more kids on the track program. You can have, you could even lacrosse. We don't really have a lot of kids doing lacrosse. So there are activities that could become more prominent if you had a bigger population to draw upon, depending on what the student interest was.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be the biggest fear that kids had was, wait a minute, I've been playing basketball in Newmarket for 13 years. You mean you bring in students from another town, and I could lose my spot on the varsity team? And there is
I
that
completely
concern.
get that.
But I would tell you, for the most part, that has not played out significantly in the Oyster River District where they've done it. I think, in fact, what has happened is there
they
are
open up more teams.
yeah, there's more teams available.
Yeah.
There are more kids playing, which has been good.
And also just like, especially for sports that are dying, keep going down because kids who are in middle school and elementary school lose interest also as like just the programs go down in the high school. So increasing that number would just not even just for like that time. It would just increase in general. Like for example, again, baseball. If baseball became, obviously there was a lot of kids who wanted to do baseball back when I was in middle school, and then that number slowly has like dwindled down, and now like we don't have the JV team. We don't have to make cuts at all for varsity, and we just like get the we're under by far. Like we only have like 14, and the numbers in middle school are dwindling just because baseball isn't as interesting or not as much participation in the high school. So just increasing that number would increase for middle school, elementary school, like kids who are debating about not playing or deciding which ones. It would definitely just going to like varsity games increase interest in general, or going to other clubs like the school play increase interest in drama, stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, the slight extension of the principle, but just the number of participants in sports who come from homeschool backgrounds and then come into the district to play sports. It's really the same principle, and it's been, I watched the baseball team last year, and certainly other programs too. It's just nice to see that even if they don't take classes here during the day, these kids are still part of the community. So I think there's an opportunity to build there. Gary?
I think it's worth bearing in mind that, as Todd put it, I mean, the wrong town could devastate a school. There's a lot of great concerns that have been discussed here tonight, but I think having the preliminary conversations doesn't lead to commitment, right? And if it's something Todd can take on, not lose focus on other things, I think it makes sense to at least have the discussions.
Yeah, I can certainly start scouting out potential partners and see what I can bring to the table.
So like an ad on Indeed or like Facebook post or.
eHarmony.
Oh, okay.
I don't know any of those folks.
You're not old.
Yes, you're right in the middle of the fairway there.
I post something on my Snapchat story or something.
Yeah.
All right. Next up on the agenda, we actually, sorry, I do want to take one step back, and Gary and Amy, we were asked if it's possible for the two of you to come in and sign this by the end of the day, Monday. The other three of us will sign it this evening, but this is the state form for the budget. So sorry,
on Monday, the end of the day on Monday, you said?
Yes. So by then, I mean,
Okay.
if you're available tomorrow, that's fine too.
Yeah, it will probably be Monday.
Okay. Just
Thank you, though, for reminding me.
Yeah, Jana asked me to remind you, and I just reminded myself just now. So, next, any correspondence that the board has received? Gary, Amy, anything?
I have not.
I have not as well. So there has been a suggestion that the school district send out a budget newsletter just explaining the budget, the effort that we went through to create it, the math that goes into it, the process. That would probably, we would time that to come out after the deliberative session, but before voting day. I don't know, it's not really an action item, we're not voting on it, but I don't know if there's any discussion or...
What's the cost?
Yeah, I apologize for having something on the agenda that I'm not there to discuss in person.
But
Todd and I kind of discussed it during the agenda setting. Basically, it occurred to me that we try these tons of different avenues of communication, and we try to get the budget out there. And we've done TV things, and we've done these, and we do the budget workshops. And if we could start creating a very consistent year after year way of communicating the budget, whether that's a newsletter, Twitter post, I don't know what, think a newsletter makes more sense. But so then at least people would start getting in the habit of it every year saying, oh, the school budget's coming up. You want $500,000 to do X. Let me go see what their newsletter says about why they want it. What are the details behind it, the background, things that we can't put on the warrant.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, no, properly constructed, it would be informative for folks, because, I mean, that is a good point. There's a lot of legal requirements and a lot of past practice in terms of what we put on the warrant that bury a lot of the color that goes with this.
I understand it. I understand the impetus for it. Two things. Like, one, like, how much does it cost, right? It's like because we're talking about a mailer, right?
Sorry, Phil, I don't know if the microphone, you turn away from the mic.
Keep giving me bum
you
mics.
could put the mic on the other side, maybe, I don't know, sure. But,
I paid for this mic.
Blame the tool.
So
Primary humor, I like that.
Yeah, primary humor, right? See, yeah, I'm going the Wayback Machine on that one. So I guess my question is cost. If we're gonna mail it, and also sort of like from like a net zero perspective, like are we like gonna print it and mail it, or are we thinking about like e-newsletter or something like that?
I think when Gary and I spoke about it, I don't think we had determined. I think we just wanted to put out a newsletter that would give some kind of an overview of the budget process that was, I don't know if I want to call it apolitical, but is the board's perspective on it, and whether it was an email or posted on lots of different places, put in the town newsletter so that it was easily accessible.
I love that.
I mean, cost, I mean, to do a mass mailing of anything, you know, it's going to be like, you know, roughly 50 cents a mailing, you know, times however many there are. And I haven't actually done the math on how many home addresses there are here in town.
I just remember, like, from the town side, like, they budget, like, hey, I'm going to do this many mailers for the water department and stuff, right? Because it actually does, it's not huge, but it's an amount of money. And
yeah, it's probably a couple $1,000 to do a mailer to the whole town.
And like, I'm just
yeah, I think the postcard we talked about for last year was around 500 or 1,000 for just a postcard. So
and then, like,
I don't think mailing it makes sense. I just think a consistent place, and maybe we advertise the heck out of it, but people know, oh, every year on the school website, it's going to be a link that says budget newsletter that talks about why the budget's what it is in an apolitical way.
I'm totally on board for like something like that, or like using the town newsletter, or borrowing their distribution list or whatever, getting it on.
Yeah.
I just don't want to have these visions, and the burgeoning environmentalist in me is of people getting something in the mailbox and being like circular file, and it just ends up.
I even wonder too if like you could just like put like I like the idea of doing it on the school website, and even holding it up there the whole year, and not just around the budget season, so everyone knows where they're going. But also, if it's just like you had like, you know, like there's all those they're not posters, but like the little things that you see up at Panzanella's or other business around wherever, that people with a QR code that just go, just something like that to get it out instead of a flyer. So.
Here's your pizza. Would you like this card explaining the town budget?
Yeah.
So I think if you were going to do it, obviously there would have to be, I would assume you'd want to authorize somebody to draft something, whether it's a member of the board, or you want to say, hey, Todd, why don't you take a crack at it? To Dan's point, I think we're thinking probably sometime after the deliberative session would be the timeline, so that.
So no decision needs to be made tonight, though. Okay.
No, I mean, we've got a lot of time between now and the deliberative session, so. Yeah, again, there was no action item here, it was just discussion. Something that does have an action item tied to it, Todd is going to walk us through the new 4-year agreement that's come out of the SST governing board.
But those of you don't know that there was a law change about a year ago that changed the way career technical agreements were designed. Previously, Newmarket was part of the SST Region 18, and it was a 20-year agreement. Okay, so one big change is now the agreements are 4 years at a time. So this is a 4-year agreement, which seems much more rational. from the standpoint of, you know, things can change a lot in 20 years. And so anyway, so it's a 4-year agreement. You'll also, probably none of you were part of the board when the last agreement was done, but it's a lot shorter of an agreement because much of the language that was in the previous agreement was about meeting Department of Ed and state standards and reporting to the Department of Ed. What has changed in the law is that the Department of Ed and the state is no longer the regulatory body that's approving the agreement. The agreement is basically agreed to by the partners that are in the region. So this is an agreement between the 6. It would reflect the 6 schools that send students to SST. So there are some basic differences. One is all the language about the Department of Ed is gone. But if you flip into the document, you'll see there's some yellow, things that are in yellow are the big changes. So you know this because last year I came to you and said the law changed and we have to conform our calendar to SST. And so one piece of this is just putting in writing the calendar conformity component. So it's basically everybody who signs the agreement is obligated to work to meet that. So that's one component. The second piece is spelling out the language around providing transportation. I'm trying to remember if it wasn't in their old agreement, but the language is different and the legal citation is different. Moving down below, there is the idea that as the agreement between the sending district, Newmarket, and the receiving district, which would be SAU 16, is that we're all going to work to make sure that basically kids aren't academically prevented from participating in the program, and that if they take credits at SST, they're granted at the sending high school, and that we will do everything we can to kind of collaborate on that to make sure our programs align and kids can take full credit of that. There is some language in here too about because you keep in mind that the state did adopt competencies since the last agreement was done, so there's some reference to competencies and trying to make sure that our competencies work so that, for example, if a kid was taking, in fact we have this with a student, they're taking one of the programs at SST, but because the competencies in SST, that program, are math heavy, it can meet the standard for graduation here, which is having a 4th-year math experience. So there's a lot of that kind of arrangement there. So that's in there. And then basically that every 4 years we're going to renew this agreement. So it's a pretty straightforward agreement. We did have this vetted by council, and here we are. So the deadline to for us to approve it is January 1st. So if people want to think on it and come back and officially act on it at the next meeting, that can happen. But we can also act on it tonight. And then Gary, once assuming we approve it, Gary, you'd have to come in and sign as the board chair, because I would sign as super, and then you'd need to come in and sign as board chair.
Okay. I presume that we really don't have any option on this language.
Well, for the most part, this has been vetted. Like I say, we've taken all the new state statutes and we've negotiated it through 6 districts and had attorneys vet it. And yes, I think this is, given the ambiguity that has been created by some of the changes, such as the big ambiguity that's created is the lack of a regulatory agency being in charge of it, because it was always the Department of Ed was ultimately who we were reporting to, and they no longer are taking that role. So that's the biggest change. And when you take away a regulatory agency, you're left with, okay, what are we all going to agree to? So the strength of this agreement is the 6 school systems that are signing it.
So I guess my point is deferring voting on it doesn't really benefit us because there's not a lot we can realistically do without creating a whole lot of turmoil with negotiations in every other district.
Yeah, but we are obligated, given that we live within the region of Region 18, we would still be obligated if kids wanted to go there to pay for it. So the cost is, legally, we're required to offer it because it's available within our region. So it's just a question of, really, the agreement is us being part of the agreement and coming to the table and saying, yes, we are fully supporting it. So to your point, there are limited options. If we don't sign it, it's not like we could say we're going to go shop for another career tech center. We don't have that option.
Other questions or comments from the board? There is a bit of a fait accompli here with the way state law does this. So, all right. Moving on then, policies. We're having the first read on 4 of them this evening. First one being policy BEDG, minutes revision. Phil or Andrew want to fill us in on this one?
This one basically was, correct me if I'm wrong, but this one's just basically to update the Mass new state law concerning minutes and closed meetings.
Sealed minutes.
Sealed minutes, thank you.
So it basically creates a process to address sealed meetings.
Which we're required to do now.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Any questions?
Questions, Gary, Amy? Hearing none. Policy.
No, thank you.
Thanks. Policy CBI, evaluation of the superintendent, which is a revision to the existing policy.
Okay. So when describing this one, I'm just going to use I because I just know that I don't want to speak for anyone else here, but I feel like that in many ways, Phil, Todd, and I were on the same boat here, that the existing evaluation of the superintendent was cumbersome and unclear, and just know based on past experiences prior to this current board that oftentimes it would make either the evaluation of the superintendent last minute and not be a very effective tool to improve the district. So we spent a lot of time, and I emphasize a lot of time, discussing and looking at options. And I think I would feel like I really should give credit to Todd really coming up with ways that Phil and I talked and actually putting them into a process that would work. And I thank him for that and appreciate his patience, but I'm really proud of this because I think it's going to create a process that makes the evaluation of the superintendent a regular thing, but also be a regular thing that goes throughout the entire year, but it's based on growing as opposed to checking off a box. Am I missing anything? Or
No, I would agree. I'd also say, like, there's work still going on for the R document, where like a lot of the meat that you're going to see of what Andrew just discussed is in there. But I think the core policy there's a philosophical shift, even though it doesn't seem like a major shift at it from the last one, towards ongoing growth as opposed to, honestly, similar to the teacher evaluations, the way Patty was talking about it. Like far more around like, hey, how are we continually growing as opposed to, all right, let's check this block.
yeah.
Okay.
And I'd like to add the biggest difference was if you notice that there are 4 specific indicators instead of, I believe it was 6 or even possibly 8. It was 10. I'm sorry, 10. 10, and then also there are specific dates that things have to occur as part of this policy in order for us to make sure that they're done, but also done in a way that's effective.
All right. So this one, just for clarity's sake, was not presented as a red line. This is like literally just a rewrite.
Yes. Yeah. I think the old one is on page 79 of the packet.
Yep.
But yes, it's based, I believe, very much influenced by what Massachusetts has.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that we just came up with. It's based on research.
Okay. Next on the agenda, policy JICM, bring your own device, which is a new policy.
Yeah, I'll be doing
Yeah, no, absolutely.
One of the things we've been doing a lot of this year is looking at cybersecurity. And Jason Carey has been doing a lot of work on auditing all of our cyber systems. And one of the recommendations has been to have a separate bring your own device network so that people who are who have a personal device in our system can log in to a separate network and have access and use, but it's not the same network, which leaves us vulnerable to cyber attacks. And what this does is we don't have a policy to regulate it, so it's basically creating one. And this is basically the language recommended by the New Hampshire School Board Association, with a few tweaks that Jason made to align it with practice here in Newmarket. So it would be having a policy where one doesn't exist to regulate a bring your own device network.
Basically, I'm sure basically what we do is the student's responsible for bringing that device in before it can hop onto the network, beyond being a guest. That makes sense. Yeah.
All right, so I mean, this sounds really similar to something that we do at work. If you don't have a company-issued device, you've got a separate Wi-Fi network that segregates the traffic away from things that we don't want to expose to attack. Jason's not here, so we can't really ask him technically. So we're limiting this to only Windows, Mac OS, and Chrome OS devices? Am I reading this correctly?
That is correct.
Is there a particular rationale behind that?
That's
The
where I would have
software
to
that's
have
on
Jason
it.
answer
Okay.
that. I can get that answer for you. I can have,
What else would there be?
So you know,
Those
like
big
how
ones, right?
like, you have like
Linux.
the guest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Wi-Fi,
somebody
and you
could
have, like, the
come in
school
with something
Wi-Fi, so I'm guessing when you
Linux
take
or
yours,
ARM,
I'm guessing what you
I mean,
take
it's more
yours.
of a question. If there's a particular security reason why that has to be the case, then, so be it.
yeah.
I'm just
Obviously a Jason question, but because those are listed under the security sub-bullet, it does feel it's probably.
But
Yes.
I will get an answer to that.
All right.
Um,
And then the other observation I had looking at it, smartphones are not considered suitable for classroom use. The thing that worries me a bit about that is how rapidly the line between tablets and smartphones is starting to blur in the world, that I just would worry about us winding up with something that's unintended or difficult to police, because, again, you see smartphones that are basically a tablet. You see tablets that people are running Google Voice on and use them like a phone. It just feels like something that we may wind up wishing we'd written it differently, is all.
Okay.
Last but not least, policy KCD, public gifts and donations. This is a revision to the existing policy.
Yeah, this is a revision of the revision that we just saw. This basically increases the gift amount based on now, instead of our recommendation, the state, I believe, right?
Yes. Yeah, so the
State law change.
state law change.
Yeah.
Thank you, Concord. All right, that does it for the policies. Todd, do we have any donations to acknowledge this evening?
We have one donation to acknowledge from Oyster River Women Aid they donated $500 to the Elementary School Nurses Fund.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to Oyster River Women Aid for that generous donation. Moving on, public comment. Seeing no members of the public present, we will close public comment at 7:13. All right, action items. I'd seek a motion to approve the November 16th public and non-public minutes.
So moved.
I'm sorry. I don't know that now is the time to do it or after the motion. There was a couple
So you got
things.
edits
Motion,
after the
discussion
motion.
is when you would bring up the minutes, right?
Okay. So I'll second.
Thank you. Motion from Phil, second from Andrew. What you got?
So in the non-public, it says that we approved. Oh, I gotta read this wrong.
I'm sorry, I missed the motion. Was it to approve both or just the public or?
Both of them.
Both of them.
Okay. Yeah, there are significant issues with the non-public that. I
Okay.
think
Did you want? Maybe you'd be better to
completely
describe it.
addressed its entirety, yeah.
Okay.
I would suggest we skip voting on the non-public and just vote on the public.
All right. right, I'd entertain a amendment to sever the non-public from the public minutes.
I will amend my motion as such.
Andrew, are you?
Yeah, second.
All right, so we will segregate the two. Does anybody have any edits or comments on the public minutes?
There is a friendly edit, Violet, which is basically, they didn't record, it doesn't record the reasons that we went into non-public. It says the letters, but we have to provide the reason, which I believe were, hopefully I said when I asked for the motion, was to discuss the MOA, discuss the proposed contract, and whatever the third one was that I can't find right now. Or settlement agreement, MOA, and so that helped me. What was the other thing we talked about? Sick bank.
The retirement.
Oh, sick bank and bus monitor.
We went in for the retirement incentive, correct?
Look at the action items from the last. Said we had MOAs for sick bank, bus monitor, and then there was a settlement agreement we discussed. And those should have been listed in the public minutes of why we were going in.
Okay. Everybody okay with those edits to the
Yeah.
minutes?
And then in the action items in that one, it says that we approved the retirement incentive requests. We approved the retirement incentive requests for those that met the requirements.
Thank you, Andrew.
And then we had asked for the settlement to be in the minutes. It's not in the minutes.
That is actually a very good point.
We did, and then Todd mentioned that we could put them on the website as part of the minutes or the material, so I'm fine with them having it included because we did put it.
Yeah, you did vote for it, and they should be there.
All right, so add.
Is there a reason why they're not, or is it just?
Patty, I asked Patty because there was a question about the legality of having the signatures and sign, and so we were going to run it by council just to make sure that we weren't stepping into anything. But yes, we did vote to put them on the website, and I just wanted to, before we actually included them, we will include them, but we wanted to make sure it was okay from council before we did it.
So basically, it's whether or not the signatures are blacked
Yeah,
out.
it's basically it's the
Okay.
signatures and
Okay.
yeah, redacted. That's what it comes down to. So it's not the agreement; it's the signatures.
So from a practical standpoint, if we haven't resolved that question, can we vote to accept these minutes?
I don't see any reason why you can't just delay voting on them until next
I
meeting.
withdraw my motion.
You can do that.
Thank you. So, yeah, we're
The whole
cooking.
reason you came tonight, Bill, right?
All right, so we will, we'll table action items 1 and 2, the public and non-public minutes from November the 16th. Who has the manifest?
Dun, dun, dun. I make a motion to approve the manifest for the week of December 8th, 2023, for the amount of $2,370,844.07.
Second.
Motion from Andrew, second from Phil. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 We are unanimous 5-0 on the manifest. So I guess at this point, does anybody on the board have any objection to voting on the 4-year agreement with SST this evening?
No.
No.
Seeing none, I would accept a motion to approve the 4-year renewal of the agreement with SST.
So moved.
So moved.
Oh, and give it to Ann.
Yep, motion from Amy,
Second.
second from Phil.
I would just like to say, while I strongly am excited about SST and very excited we have the option for the students, we need to have some sort of cohesive plan that's not eroding the options that we have here and that they complement each other. So.
I am 100% on board with that
Agreed.
idea.
Could not agree more.
Yep. All right, all those in favor? Aye.
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 We are unanimous 5-0 on approving that. So Gary, if you can come in and sign, and we'll get that back to them.
Tomorrow morning, I will. Yep.
We do not have any need for a non-public meeting this evening, so I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I will second.
Motion from Phil, second from Andrew. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.